Unfurling a giant image of the Buddha over a mountainside beside the great Drepung monastery, monks gave Tibetan pilgrims an annual glimpse of one of Tibet's great ceremonies. The 200 square metre thangka, an embroidery by monks of Drepung monastery using gold silk thread on a cotton background, may be only 7 years old, but it takes centre stage in a ceremony dating back hundreds of years. More than 100 monks from the monastery, once the largest in the world with a population of 10,000, carried out the rolled up thangka and set it down at the foot of a nearby hill. The crowd roared with joy as monks at the top of the hill pulled the thangka open with ropes to display an image of the Sakyamuni Buddha. They tossed hundreds of white silk scarves onto the picture. Few of the 150,000 pilgrims gathered for the annual Shoton or yogurt festival questioned whether the ritual represents real religious freedom. China's destruction of religion during the 1966-76 Cultural Revolution, when most Tibetan monasteries were dynamited to the ground, has been replaced by a tentative relaxation. But control tightened swiftly at the first sign of anti-Chinese sentiment in the restive Himalayan region. Tension simmers between the Tibetans' profound faith in a mystical form of Buddhism and the Chinese vision of Tibetan culture and religion. Families of 3 generations made up the crowd of faithful, although young, educated Tibetans were few and far between. The older generation was well represented. The Shoton, or Yogurt Festival, was originally a purely religious festival, marking the time when monks and nuns finished their annual summer retreat. Lhasa residents would offer them yogurt to drink because they were not allowed to eat meat. It developed into a 5-day pageant featuring the unfurling of the giant thangka, Tibetan opera, wrestling and archery, performed in the grounds of the summer palace of the Dalai Lama, who has lived in exile since fleeing to India in 1959. The small family-run Joe Louis Theatre is the last in Thailand that practices traditional Thai puppetry. Centuries old, it is recognised as one of Asia's 3 most ancient forms of puppetry, along with Vietnam's water puppets and Japanese buraku. Combining puppetry with traditional Khon mask dancing, it takes 3 performers to manipulate each of the ornately decorated puppets in an intricate dance, needing total coordination and years of training. But the theatre, based in a busy Bangkok night market popular with locals and tourists, is struggling to survive. With no state funding, little support from Thailand's tourism authority, and sagging tourism, it looks like the end is coming for the little theatre and one of the world's rarest art forms. Owners said audience figures recently fell to an all-time low. Rather than the 150 people per show needed to break even, puppeteers got used to performing to audiences of 30 to 50 people. But when news broke of the theatre's impending closure, the Thai public reacted with rare, widespread protest. Fired by discussions on internet chat sites and TV talk shows, supporters started flooding to see the show, and critics called on the government to step in to protect the ancient art form. Since then, the Culture Ministry, who originally refused state support to the theatre, has agreed to help, and the Tourism Authority has promised to do more to promote the show. But the owners of Joe Louis, named after a traditional puppeteer who founded the theatre and resembled the American boxer Joe Louis, hope the current success is not just a flash in the pan. But for now, it looks like the show will go on. Plunging into a pool of near-freezing water in the middle of winter is the perfect cure, whatever your pain. At least that's what competitors at the 4th World Ice Swimming Championships say. Some 300 racers took the plunge in the Arctic north of Finland. The racers in Munio covered 25 metres in a pool cut into a frozen lake. Racers from 6 countries, all aged between 11 and 79, turned out for this 3-day event. I was doing it for 25 years. This way I could keep my rheumatism under control, said Esa Väisänen from Finland. And while winning seems secondary to participating in this sport, the competitive drive is what brought the 300 contenders to Lapland. Although in overwhelming majority among contenders, Finns managed to take only 1 championship title. Russians Natalia Vasilinok and Natalia Isapova took the gold and the silver in the women's 30 to 39-year-old series, while Ingeloh Linnaeus from Germany went home with the women's bronze in the 50 to 59-year-olds division. 4 French tourists clad in white bathrobes, blue towels and red hats only discovered their tour operator had signed them up for the competition the day before the race. No wins this year, but they will be back after training in sunny Saint-Tropez. Whether that's the right place to train for ice swimming is questionable. We'll just have to wait till next time to see if they can pull it off. An old library situated in the Aleppi district of India's southern Kerala state, with a collection of some ancient books, records and a huge stock of 16th century palm leaf manuscripts, is managed by leprosy patients. The library is run under the Leprosy Sanitarium, which was once home for hundreds of leprosy patients. But at present, there are just 400 patients left in the sanitarium. Lepers living in the sanitarium take care of these rare books and manuscripts. KG Narayan, a leprosy patient and caretaker of the library, says that though there are several old records and manuscripts, there are very few educated patients left. The social stigma attached to leprosy is very high, in a country where lepers, considered unclean, are often forced to beg because their families and neighbours do not accept them. There are close to 4 million leprosy patients in India, and they are amongst the high-risk communities in need of massive support. Ostracised from society and often unable to work, these people are victims of a disease that changes their lives permanently. Leprosy is a leading cause of permanent disability in the world. Though not fatal, the chronic symptoms often affect individuals in their most productive stage of life. Villagers on the Indonesian island of Bali began cremating 52 dead relatives, some of whom died more than 4 years ago. The ceremony was held in the village of Ubud on the resort island of Bali. Men and women in traditional sarongs filled the gravesite, as relatives of the deceased took turns digging to exhume the bodies from their graves. The bodies were then wrapped in palm mats and placed in a line on simple bamboo supports for the cremation. In the Hindu religion, cremation is meant to liberate the soul of the dead, allowing it to travel to heaven and reincarnation. For the Balinese Hindus, this cremation ceremony is the culmination of a series of ceremonies throughout their lives. And as well as being the most important, it is also the most expensive to perform. So in many villages, a mass cremation will be held so the expense can be shared and relatives can finally fulfill their obligations to their deceased relatives. Relatives and friends gave offerings to the deceased, some in the form of money to spend in the afterlife. This mass cremation comes just days ahead of a royal cremation for Tijora Istri Nyang Muta, who died at the age of 94. It was expected to be the biggest ceremony of its kind. Perhaps the last of the major royal cremations. Muta was the last of 11 children of the old king of Ubud. The ancient Roman city of Pompeii, southeast of Naples, is one of the hot spots which attracts more than 2 million people a year. For the first time, tourists have been allowed to enter the site at night unaccompanied. During summer, when temperatures can rise to around 35 degrees Celsius, visitors have the chance to escape the heat of the day and soak up the evening atmosphere, an idea thought up by Archaeological Office of Pompeii. People carefully make their way through the ruins as a voice booms over music with half columns and remains of temples softly illuminated. The Roman city of Pompeii was destroyed by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, killing around 20,000 people with its toxic fumes and showering the city in ash and debris. Plaster casts recreating body shapes of those trapped in the eruption, and objects such as amphoras can also be seen. Night visits are limited to a small area of the ruins compared to the 44 hectares which are open to the public during the day. The remains were discovered around 1750, when bodies of people were unearthed as well as household objects. The nighttime excursions are concentrated around the Old Forum, the marketplace area which was the focus for important political and religious functions. Shonak, home to the first walk-in world's largest cuckoo clock. It lies in the picturesque Black Forest in southern Germany, a favourite among tourists, not just from the United States, but from around the world. Although outsiders looking at the green rolling hills and quiet villages in between might be tempted to think the clocks tick backwards in this part of the world, souvenir vendors like Adolf Herr worry about issues such as the strong euro and the weak dollar. Cuckoo clocks have been made in the Black Forest for generations. The company's manager, Klaus Deutsch, indicated where the Black Forest cuckoo clock's future could lie. The American market takes about 40,000 cuckoo clocks, or 70% that are made in the Black Forest every year. But more and more, there is a tendency that the Asian market will take over this position. People are fed up with violence and aggression in books. They want to read stories in which the most exciting thing that happens is that the main characters drink a cup of tea. That is the opinion of Alexander McCall Smith, a Scottish medical lawyer who became a best-selling author with a series of novels on the heartwarming adventures of a woman who starts a detective agency in the South African country of Botswana. His heroine, a plump 35-year-old named Precious Ramotswe, has appealed to readers in her hometown of Makuji and in many other countries around the world with a unique mixture of old-fashioned values and modern female independence. She has also managed to spark wider interest in Africa and in her own small country, a former British protectorate with a population of fewer than 2 million, now seen as one of the main success stories on the continent. The author has written since he was 8 years old and has published titles ranging from books on law to children's stories with whimsical titles like The Finer Points of Sausage Dogs and The Perfect Hamburger. Romania isn't yet the world's best-known tourist destination, but for fans of Dracula, the Romanian province of Transylvania is the place to be. As the setting for Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, the rugged Transylvanian landscape is known to millions of readers as the home of Dracula, an undead count with a taste for blood. Based loosely on the historical figure Vlad the Impaler, who did not drink blood but merely impaled his victims, the story of Dracula has spawned countless books and films. And since the fall of communism in 1989, many Romanians have sought to exploit the popularity of Dracula, with hotels, restaurants, Dracula tours, and even plans for a Dracula theme park. Researchers say the power of the Dracula story touches deep-seated human fears of mortality and blood. But as Romania modernizes its economy, some worry the Dracula myth could actually hold the country back. But even if the legend of Dracula gives fear to some investors, for others it could be a draw. Dracula-themed hotels and restaurants across Bucharest and Transylvania are often full of tourists from around the world seeking a Dracula experience. At Hotel Dracula in Borgo Pass, guests are offered Dracula-themed rooms and even a frightening tour which keeps most guests from sleeping at all. Plans for a Dracula theme park have recently been shelved after objections from historians and even Prince Charles that the park would affect historical sites. A well-preserved graveyard, possibly 1,000 years old, has been discovered at an archaeological complex of Inca and pre-Inca temples on the outskirts of the Peruvian capital. Archaeologists unearthed the remains of 30 people, including 19 still intact as mummies, dating from between 1000 and 1500, making them some of the oldest mummies ever found in Peru. Archaeologist Peter Eghout of Brussels Free University, the leader of the project, said the discovery showed the remains of several cultures buried on top of each other. It was not clear to which cultures the mummies belonged, but they were likely to have been farmers and craftsmen who lived before the Inca Empire 5 centuries ago. In this discovery, 4 of the mummies probably died as sacrifices and were either buried alive, killed by blows to the head, or strangled. Holding up the remains of a 2-year-old boy, British archaeologist Lawrence Owens said we have a child approximately 2 years old, and the evidence indicates he was buried alive. Another of those sacrificed was a 12-year-old boy whose skull was cracked at the front, probably by a heavy blow. A mummified 35-year-old man with a rope around his neck was also among the 4 sacrificed. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of mummies in recent years that mostly date from the Inca culture, including about 2,000 unearthed from under a shanty town near the capital in 2002. In February 2004, 2 mummies predating the Incas were found under a school in southern Peru.